Hi, this is Gautam. For today's episode, we're going to look at chapter number 15 of the Economic Survey. And if you take the topic, as all of you can see, it is on urbanization, making India cities work for its citizens. Now, as part of this topic, the content can be used both for general studies geography and also for your geography optional. So I'll just mention the purpose of the discussion. It is to make sure that you concisely understand the chapter and have a simple summary. Because rather than reading the entire chapter line by line, we want to simplify and get an understanding of the major points, which will help us for answer writing in the mains examination. So with a short introduction, let's try to understand what the chapter principally talks about. Now you can get the crux of the chapter in the introduction. It says that if you take India, cities are extremely important economically because cities are not merely habitats, they are form of a critical economic infrastructure, but at the same time they have a lot of stresses and complexity, congestion, etc. So in India we have this paradox. So the chapter wants to understand why are cities contributing really well to economy, but at the same time they have a lot of environmental and social problems. So if you take the introduction provides the classification of cities based on the Reserve Bank of India, classification based on population. That is, if you take tier 1 to tier 6 cities, you see that population is slowly declining from 1 lakh and above to less than 5,000. And the point which they're trying to make is that tier 1 cities dominate the landscape in India. And talking about the paradox, you clearly see the introduction. What the survey wants to identify is if Indian cities are comparable in population to the global cities, like New York or London or Shanghai or Singapore, why are they struggling to meet? And in India, we have a lot of potential for growth for many tier 2 cities. If they grow, will they face the same problems as tier 1 cities? This is what they're trying to talk about. And the first aspect which they understand is about India's urban population. So, all of you know, if you're preparing for civil service exam, that based on 2011 census, India's urban population is 31,000. Now, what the survey tries to do is go back to the definition on how exactly we define an urban area. These are the parameters. So it says that the settlement must be greater than 5,000, point number one. Second, 75 percentage of male employment. Keep this in mind, not total employment, but male employment should be non-agricultural, and minimum population density of 400 persons per square kilometer. Now, these are mathematical criteria. Keep it in mind. Now, when you apply this criteria based on 2011 census, it is a 31%, which means 69 percentage of rural areas. So, 69 percentage of Indian population lives in rural. But you will see a paradox here. What is a paradox? If you look at the economic classification of primary, secondary, and tertiary sector, the primary sector in India contributes to only 20% of the GDP. So the paradox I was talking about is it really possible that 69 percentage of population is contributing only to 20 percentage of GDP, and that 80 percentage of GDP, that is your manufacturing sector and your services sector, come only from cities, that is 31 percentage of population. You see that there is a big mismatch here, right? This is what the survey says as the concept of ruralization of industry, that industries are not located only with reference to urban area, but most likely they are present in rural areas also because of the census definition which we are using. Now, to explain this, the survey goes on to point out if we take different definitions, the urbanization percentage in India largely increases. Because if you look at the normal value of average for low income countries and middle income countries, this percentage of 31% is much lower. For example, look at this data. Say they're looking at Ghana's definition and Mexico's definition. So based on that, this 31% increases rapidly to 47 or 65 if you take 2,500 per population. And they take data from United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Based on this data also, India's urban population can increase to 63% if the criteria is changed. That is, if it is made more flexible. So understanding is what you call as an urban area is definitely beyond 31%, or urban functions, that is activities in your secondary and tertiary sector, is definitely beyond 31%. So that's the first understanding from the survey which you have to get. Fine. Now, on top of this, they have an interesting discussion using the nighttime light data. Fine. So if you look at the picture, they would have given images from different cities. The red areas are considered as the core, which are highlighted really well, where the light density is extremely high and the yellow areas technically form the periphery. So what the survey has done is that they've identified major cities, and for the major cities, they have taken the ratio of core to of periphery to core. So idea is, if you have a ratio, just a second, right here, of periphery to core, if the peripheral area, that is the surrounding area, is greater than the core, let's say core is much smaller and this area is much bigger, then naturally the ratio will be greater than or equal to 1. So that is a simple understanding. And they found out, if you look at the periphery to core ratio, here it is. In 16 cities, the ratio exceeds 1, indicating that peripheral areas have consistently grown faster than the urban core. The point you have to understand clearly is this, that Indian cities are expanding horizontally faster and they are not growing that vertically. This is a very important idea. This will support your understanding of urban sprawl, that Indian cities have a tendency to grow faster horizontally, competing with the rural areas for resources rather than vertically. The entire discussion is based on this single fundamental point. So keep this in mind. This data set can actually be directly used in your prelims examination. Similarly, sorry, mains examination. Similarly, the data points which we saw here also regarding the fact that for a flexible urbanization, India's urbanization ratio will definitely be more than 31%. Now, that's the fundamental idea which the first part needs to discuss. Now, again, when it comes to box-based items which are given as part of chapter, you can read for the first time, but every box always focus on the main areas which are given. For example, take this box. It talks about how Kerala goes for a flexible criteria of urbanization, including functionality. So, primary thing which you can note down from mains perspective is this. I suggest you directly go for insights from Kerala's urban transition. The idea is whatever is politically classified as a municipality. Municipality is more of an administrative division. It's related to polity, is not the only area which has the functionality of a city. It is expanding outside the administration. So the main points you have to note down is, so we have to recognize functionality of urban settlements. That's how we use urban areas to define, not simply based on population. It's about what type of functions which they do. Second is strengthening peri-urban and regional planning. Rather than going for politically single administrative unit, planning should be expansive, going for the entire region. So regional planning will help. Number three, supposing again strategic regional nodes, governance systems and boundary considerations like how you classify polity, and finally developing better methods of financing. So that is a fundamental idea. So work on box items this way, and this will save you a lot of time. Now, the second part of the discussion is regarding governance deficit in cities, and they primarily talk about cities not having their own source of revenue, own source of income or own source of revenue. Now, why is this important? If you take global cities are definitely able to finance things by themselves. Once they can finance themselves, if they are not going to depend more on the state government or the central government, then it is very much possible for them to operate independently. But India, we have a big problem. For example, ULBs play a important formal role in such as land use policy, utility, and cadre management continue to be exercised at the state level. So even though cities have a lot of functions, they don't have power politically. At the same time, they don't have power financially. So if you remember the three-tier structure of governance in India, the devolution of powers after the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment. 74th Constitutional Amendment is specific for your municipalities and corporations. You will see that they have less amount of political power. Most of the subjects, even if it is constitutionally sanctioned, the states are not ready to transfer. So this is a political problem. Keep this very simple discussion in mind. And regarding own source revenue, you can come to this page, page number 599. There is a simple data point where they compare own source revenue of India with other countries. For example, if you take own source revenue, in India, it is only 15.5 percentage of GDP compared to 0.3 to 0.6% of GDP for low and middle income countries. So even our peers are performing better. And if you take OECD countries, it is roughly at 2 to 4% of GDP. So my recommendation would be to pick this data point, and you can use it for general studies, polity or economic discussions also, that urban local bodies rely more on grants rather than their own source of revenue. Okay. So that's the idea. Beyond that, there are other data points, but this is a very concise one. So coming to the next part in page 599, we're going to look at land housing, mobility, sanitation and waste management. So first part of discussion is that survey is pretty harsh in calling land as debt capital. Now what is debt capital? Debt capital refers to assets that are unable to function as productive capital. So that's what it technically means. So why is it not productive? Because there is a lot of opaqueness in land rights when it comes to urban areas. Look at it, you can directly use this phrase. These resources are unable to contribute to economic activity due to being constrained by regulatory, legal, or market inefficiencies. So we have to make sure that land is effectively used. And to explain this, they are having a discussion on floor space index. Now, what is FSI? FSI is the total amount of built up area over per unit of land. So if you have a single floor building and if you compare it with a four-floor building, the four-floor building is definitely having more built-up area of the same space. So this will have higher FSI and this will have lower FSI. That is the idea. The problem is the survey says is if you take regulations in India, polity-based regulations, most of the regulations sanction low floor space index. So which means city cannot expand vertically. Instead of that, when you have a floor space index and if there is increase in migration, increase in urban population, if you cannot expand vertically, then cities will have a tendency to expand horizontally. Think with the first discussion. The first discussion also talked about this argument. Based on observation, cities have a tendency to expand laterally and not vertically. So, one of the major reasons is a political or administrative dimension. That's the idea, you need to keep this in mind. So, just by improving your flow space index, if you relax your regulations and allow for vertical growth, then definitely it is possible for having compactness in urban planning. So that's the fundamental idea. For your mains examination, you can simply take these values. For example, you can take values of Chennai, Mumbai, or even Bengaluru and compare it to the city like Chicago or Tokyo. You'll see their floors FSI values are extremely higher. So that's the data point, and that's a very fundamental idea which is discussed as part of it. And if you come to page number 601, you will see that government, the survey has mentioned the government measures which are used for transparency in land records and digitization of land records. So that is the first part of chapter 15. I am splitting it as two videos because the first video I uploaded, there were audio issues. I just want to avoid the problem. The second part of discussion will continue from mobility till the end of conclusion. So if you're done with the first part, you can watch the second part of the video discussion. Bye for now.